I'm really looking forward to this talk, and because this is a topic that is very close to my heart. And I will give you a brief background. Yeah. On the agenda, and I'd like to first sort of set the scene and give you some background information about who am I and why I'm so interested in this topic, and then go through a bit different dimensions of this topic, like what is philosophy about, how can it inform organization studies, and then I'll try to provide a few examples of how you can actually utilize and draw on philosophy to inform management and organization studies, and hopefully also generate impactful paper, which is part of the title here. And then I will offer you some key principles for how you can utilize and draw on philosophy, and then also discuss some challenges, because it is not all easy, this stuff. It's quite challenging. So I want to point out a few challenges that you need to perhaps reflect on and think if you want to embark on this topic. Also, please, this is some aspect of this talk may be a bit heavy, but as Ibra said, that we're trying to keep it in a more conversational tone. So I may stop from time to time and ask for if you have any questions for clarifications. And then we can perhaps wait until later on to the more heavy, juicy questions, the Q&A at the later stage there. So that's the background. So now I will then go in and have a look at the scene and what's going on here. And I think I have had an interest in philosophy ever since I did my PhD 30 years ago. Reflecting, doing this talk, it sort of struck me. I think I've been using philosophy in almost all my work, which struck me a bit, but that seems to be the case. And I will actually talk a bit about my PhD student, where I introduced the idea of philosophy and how that has helped me on the way to where I am today. So that's one that I have been sort of always interested in this in some way or another. Another important influence is my work with Professor Harry Tsoukas. It's a long collaborator. We started to collaborate research around 2009. And we were so drawn together because we both like philosophy and very intrigued by philosophy, and particularly how we can use philosophy to inform, perhaps not only our own research, but perhaps more importantly, how we as management scholars can use philosophy to inform what we're doing and do better research. And I should also mention that as either not Harry or myself, we are not trained philosophers. But as Harry Tsoukas said once, that we are very serious amateurs, meaning that we are not trained professional, but we have studied that and we work with that on a more or less daily basis. So we have quite good understanding. Particularly, I think we are sort of bridging sort of philosophy and organization studies, which also means that to be very clear, that when talking about bringing in philosophy to organization studies, we don't mean that we want to contribute to philosophy itself. That's too much. We have much more sort of modest aim is more to draw on philosophy and trying to sharpen our tools and construct our argument to generate more relevant and impactful research. So on that, we started doing a few publications, etc. And the more we work together, we start to talk about perhaps we should actually start a conference about philosophy and organizational studies, which we did in 2021. And some of you may know about the called philosophy and organization studies, which has now grown and is sort of steadily growing. So this year we had about 80 participants, and we sort of 10, 20 people increasing every year, which is very reassuring. So there's obviously an interest there. And at the same time, when we launched that conference, we also launched a special issue. For call for a special issue on philosophy and organization studies. And we said, how does philosophy illuminate the study of organization studies? And we launched that early in 2021. And now, as some of you may have seen, it was now published in organization studies there. And I think your background reading was one of the introduction chapter or article there. And I think what was particularly encouraging with that issue was that we received almost 100 submissions there. And according to Sophia, the managing editor of Organization Studies, that was one of the most, the highest submissions ever for Organization Studies. So it seems there's obviously quite strong interest out there drawing on philosophy in Organization Studies. This was very encouraging. So, and we can also see that through the conference philos now. and also, as you saw in the abstract there, that I think perhaps the most distinctive feature of philosophy is that it has kind of a critical approach that the critique assumptions, beliefs, concepts, etc., that we often take for granted. And I just want to remind you, some of you may also be familiar with my work with Mats Alvesson on problematization. And there's a very similar idea there, that the common interest is questioning. So my work with Harry and my own work on philosophy is questioning, but that's so Mats and we developed this idea of problematization methodology. That I will not talk about today, and I think Mats has talked about that in an earlier webinar. But just to make that there is this idea that through questioning, problematizing, that's how you can break new ground and also develop more impactful and relevant research. So that was the background. I hope that was pretty clear. That was an easy part. So now we're starting to get into a more heavy part, heavy part, but I'll try to make it as accessible as possible. And you have to. This is just an overview of how you can draw on philosophy to inform organization studies. So hopefully you get some ideas and inspiration for how you can do that. So, but I think before we go in, we have to ask, of course, what is actually philosophy about? I mean, we talk about that in various ways, and of course, this is an enormous question. So I'm not pretending I can answer that in any full way, but at least I can perhaps give you some hints what many people talk about when they talk about what is it about. And of course, the most common perhaps is as this etymology suggests, that philosophy is the love of wisdom. Wisdom concerns all facets of inquiry and understanding. And just wisdom is probably equally a complex and deep concept. What is actually wisdom? And again, that's people debating about that, but often it's a combination of theoretical, practical knowledge, ethical judgment, etc., that we sort of combine and use to understand life and how we can benefit both and improve our life and other people's lives. But more specifically, while very many different views of what philosophy can be about, most people and most philosophers, I would say, agree that philosophy is about something about puzzlement, curiosity, wonder, about almost everything. So it's in one sense that the philosophy is children. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? So it's we always asking this, and it's a kind of the desire, as I said, to understand how things in the broadest possible sense connect in the broadest possible sense. We want to understand how things are working in both in the social world and the natural world, I guess, but in a more basic sense than perhaps even science and research are doing there. And that's where I come to the next step, because since philosophy asks this, really going to the basics of what is reality, so philosophy usually asks more fundamental questions if they want to understand how things works. And just to give you a flavor what some of these questions may be, I mean, often there are heaps of these questions, but I'll give you what I think can be just an illustration. And for instance, these are sort of evergreens in philosophy, I would argue. So what is the meaning of life? You can hear that's a big question, that it's a question that people have been raising and talked about for thousands of years, and it's still not a comprehensive question, and people debating that. But it's often about sort of deep things like, which is also one of the oldest questions, that we're trying to explore the purpose of human existence. They ask, have life an inherent meaning, or is meaning perhaps created through some choices, relationships, achievements, etc.? So this is an enormous question. And the second question is probably also is an enormous question. So what is the nature of reality? And often we ask whether reality is objective, subjective, insubjective, or what's that? And that's something that's important for science and for research, because we always make assumptions about reality. And so philosophy helps us to unpack what we actually do mean by reality and what is reality there. And another, what is knowledge? There's another key question for us. How is knowledge possible? How can we achieve knowledge? What is truth? How do we know when we have achieved truth, etc.? So this is another question that philosophers usually work with. And of course, what is ethics? What is morality? How is the human conduct? How should we do that in the right way and the wrong way? There's another question that we never can sort of come to an end with, but something we need to talk about all the time. Do we have a free will? Well, that's another question I think is very important to ask. Do humans, for instance, have the capacity to make free, autonomous decisions? Or is our action determined by external forces like biology, environment, or fate, for instance? And equally, what is actually justice? I mean, how can we achieve social justice, and what constitutes fair treatment, and so on? So these are some questions that you can see often they remain unresolved, because they deal with these very fundamental aspects of human experience, and that continue to fascinate thinkers. But you can see even today, these are sort of questions I think is evergreen and continue, but even there are also contemporary philosophical questions that are raised today. And just to give you a flavor of that, and I'm sure you're asking many of these questions yourself. Like now you're coming back in a more contemporary form, and what is the meaning of life in technologically mediated world? As we all know, that AI system become more integrated in society, questions arise about accountability, bias, and the moral status of AI. For instance, should AI have rights, and how do we manage the impact on employment and human agency? And they're big questions that philosophers are grappling with, and I think that will help us in this. And so what is the other thing? What is the implication of posthumanism? As we know, again, you have technology like genetic engineering, AI, robotics, etc. And then philosophers start to ask, what does it mean to be a human now? you have actually a chip somewhere now, and where does the human start and where the technology start? And these are big questions we need to ask there. And today is very contemporary. What is truth in a post-truth era? You have the election in the United States, where there's a lot of talk about what actually is truth, or is only lies going on there. But that sort of asks new questions. So there's a rise of misinformation, fake news, and post-truth politics. So what is the nature of truth itself? And what is the truth in an age of media manipulation, for instance? That's a big questions we need to think about. And similarly, what is the nature of identity in a digital world? I mean, for instance, you have the rise of social media, virtual worlds, digital interaction, etc., and which then I think reshaping our identity in many fundamental ways. So philosophy may ask, what is personal identity in this era where people create multiple online personas? They have avatars and etc. So these are big questions, I would say, and social justice is another big questions today, but especially then regarding sort of systematic racism, gender equality, economic inequality. Perhaps we could ask what constitutes justice in an unequal world. So, and you can see that these questions sort of not only theoretical, but sort of have profound implications for the future of human lives and ethics and governments, and so on. So these are what I said before, that demonstrates, I think, that philosophy is concerned with all phases of human inquiry and understanding, really to understand human existence in a deeper sense. I might just stop here very briefly. Is there any questions for clarification or reflections before we take the next step? No? Crystal clear? Yeah, excellent. So then I just want to go in and talk, because we talked about what is philosophy about, but you can also ask the question, but what is the purpose of philosophy? Because if you want to draw on philosophy, maybe you need to know a bit more about the purpose. So what's the point with all this, asking these fundamental questions and questioning things all the time? What was the point of all this? And I think that's an important question to think about. And this is also a question that one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century asked, Ludwig Wittgenstein. He asked that himself. He in one of his texts, he asked the kind of rhetorical question to himself: what is your aim in of philosophy? And then he sort of pondered a bit, a slight pause. He answers then and said, it is to show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. And what is the fly bottle then? Well, it's a device, according to at least when Wittgenstein's time, when people were trying to catch flies in a bottle, because even at that time, I guess flies were quite irritable. And now in Australia, flies are really irritable because they're getting summer and they're coming out there. So I don't mind catching them, but they get caught sort of in this fly bottle. And he uses that fly bottle as a metaphor to highlight that people, including philosophers, scientists, and lay people, can easily be conceptually trapped in a network of concepts and language we use to make sense of reality. And because whatever we do, we always live in language, in concept through which we make sense of reality. And you can imagine that in one sense, as in our case, as researchers, perhaps management and organizational researchers, the fly bottle is the management and organization studies. If you can imagine yourself as a fly flying around there and not seeing that you're part of the fly bottle, you're inside, you can't get out, but you don't even see it as a bottle, but you're flying around there stuck in something. So you're trapped in a kind of web of concepts that you engage with. And then you can also, but how do we get trapped in this fly bottle, in these conceptual networks in which we make sense of the world? And of course, that's through our upbringing, education, work, etc. We require a large web of concepts we use: leaders, followers, subjects, objects, manager, diversity, race, entrepreneur, that we use to order and make sense of reality. Because in one sense, reality is nothing until we order it and conceptualize and make it into neat categories and name them in various ways. And then we use that as a kind of way to get by in the world. And the problem, of course, with this is that we are entrapped in that, and it's good in sense that helps us to get by, but it also can be constraining our thinking quite dramatically. And we often sometimes we think that this context of these words or concepts can be sort of almost a reflective of reality. So we forget that they are just concepts that we use almost to construct of reality. And to think a bit more about this, because I would say that we as management scholars, we are entrapped at least in three different big conceptual networks often. And one such one is that we use specific theoretical perspectives. That you can see that's almost a kind of common fly bottle. That often these theoretical perspectives, like practice theory, sense-making theory, institutional theory, they provide us with a large network of concepts we use to make sense and apply to reality. We're trying to understand phenomena, we theorize through these concepts. And that is helpful for us, but it also is an imprisonment for us because we often can't get out of that. We tend to get stuck in that. So if you think about for instance, a process perspective, tend to find processes everywhere. Whereas if you look in a more discursive perspective, everything becomes into discursively determined. And this is tricky, and it's something good, but it's also bad, because if you're only into that, you can't see an alternative, and you can't break out of that, and that's problematic. And another one, of course, is the specific research domain in which you are situated. We always work in particular domains, in strategy, leadership, entrepreneurship, routines, sense-making, organizational change, etc. And each of these domain has developed a particular set of concepts they use to talk about the subject matter in the domain. So if you take leadership, for instance, there is the phenomenon of authentic leadership, but it's not necessarily a direct mirroring of reality, but has been determined by researchers, choice and combinations, etc. So we then often fail to see that we are stuck in this concept, but we think that the concepts are reality, and they are not, and that we need to think through that. And that is also applies to even the research methodology we use. As the saying goes, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if you, for instance, are interested in ethnography, they have a conceptual vocabulary that is used, such as participant observation, thick description, field work, emic versus ethic perspective, regardless of topic, which is interesting. Again, that you're stuck in that, and that constrains your way of thinking and be able to see some new ways out and breaking new grounds. And I think the longer time we spend in each particular fly bottle here is perspective or research domain or research, is the harder it is to get out. And it's here that philosophy can help us to unpack some of these concepts and beliefs and assumptions underlying this. And of course, this is what actually that also philosophers can get stuck in their particular fly bottles. And that's what Wittgenstein meant, that even philosophy can do that. And he wanted us, that's the purpose of philosophy, to help other philosophers to get out of their fly bottles. And even Nietzsche saw that later on. He said that philosophizing with a hammer, you smash these fly bottles so other people can get out, because even philosophy gets stuck in particular concepts. But the idea with philosophy is to be questioning and trying to help us to become more aware of these fly bottles. Does that make sense too? At least for Ibrat, I can see he's nodding that. Yes, fantastic. So if you don't have any particular, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I really like the Wittgenstein's metaphor of the fly in the fly bottle, and I think it captures quite nicely what you described. So you alluded to us as being trapped like a flies, and therefore we need help to get out of it. But also I think there's an element where we can become those philosophers to help others to get out of the fly. You probably will touch about this, I don't know, but how do we do that?
Well, that's what I want to. That's more the rest of the talk to talk about that. But that's, of course, it has to do with that you have to understand and to use the kind of philosophical concepts and ideas. If you think about what is reality, what is knowledge, what is ethics, I mean, these are questions they have asked and reflect on for many years that we usually take for granted, but they have actually questions and concept for that. And I will give 2 examples of just that, for instance. But that's a good questions. So, okay, if I may then continue then. So just very briefly, that you may already sort of thinking about it, that what some very distinctive feature of philosophy that comes across through this questioning. And I think what you could say that one of the most distinctive features of philosophy is that it sort of takes a systematic approach and critical approach to all assumptions, beliefs, and values, etc., that we normally accept and take for granted. They ask, why is it so? Is that really so? Why do we follow this? Can it be otherwise? So they don't take it for granted. They want to get more into the basis of this. So this is something that is really what is knowledge, and that's when you start asking these more basic questions. And it is sort of through this systematic question that you are able then to unpack or questioning these most basic assumptions and beliefs, values, or concepts, and then helps us to become aware of the fly bottles, because they go down to the assumptions. On what basis do you make that concept or make that idea or statement? That's where you see what's the basis for all this, and that's where philosophy are very helpful. So they can help us to get out of the fly bottom, and at least become aware that we are in the bottom, and that's very useful in itself. So I think that the power of philosophy very much lies in its ability to free us from the multiple concepts and perspectives through which we understand reality, and then allowing us to rethink and approach reality in a new way. And that's where when you start grappling with all these big concepts in philosophy. What is reality? What is knowledge? What is freedom? And so on. That can help us to become aware of how we think, and then start to see the end of the fly bottle and perhaps get out of that. Okay, so how can then philosophy inform organization studies? And again, there's probably many ways, but I'll talk about 4 different ones that I think is very much linked directly to philosophy. And of course, the first one is that the philosophy sort of helps us to cultivate a wonder, not take things for granted, but an attitude of wonder that sort of you're trying to, as we say here, to find the ordinary to be extraordinary, the usual unusual. And then once in wonder, one must think. New concepts need to be invented and fresh distinctions need to be made. I mean, if you think about, let's say, as an example, but you may investigate the degree of freedom employees have in different types of professional services firms, for instance. Or you may want to study trust repair or digital transformation in professional services firms. But to do that, you need to define what concepts such as freedom, trust, and digital there. But you then start to may wonder the kind of the definition and the way you use freedom, trust, passion. What do they actually mean? Are they good enough? Do they capture what I want to capture? And so you start to question your own concept. Often we have, each study have some key concepts, but maybe we should question that more. Is that really a good concept to capture what I want to capture, for instance? Will it advance understanding of the phenomenon I'm trying to do there? So that's one aspect, and the other thing that philosophy helps us to do is to questioning what we call the received images of thought, and that's drawn from Deleuze, which I like that word, that the received image, how we think about things, how we conceptualize or understand things. That is kind of often it's taken for granted, it's always invisible, and one way to exemplify this is perhaps through Gareth Morgan's work on metaphors and the images of organizations, for instance, where the received, for many years, and probably still is, the received images of thought in organization management about an organization is organization as a machine or a system, and that becomes the received image of thought, and that sort of enables researchers to study organizations in a particular way, but also constrain them to do otherwise. And there he then could the other image of thought, other metaphors. So you can, I think he suggested that why not you use, for instance, the new image of thought that may not be organization as culture, which is completely new, and then enables us to study that in a new way, or organization as a brain, again throughout a new image of thought that help us to get a better understanding, perhaps, or at least different understanding of what organization is and how it works. But if you're not aware that you're stuck in a received image of thought, then you will continue study organization as a machine all the time in various ways. And again, this is help us to get out of the fly bottle, to think about this and draw on philosophy in here in terms of metaphors that philosophy and language philosophy has spoken about. And you can also say, perhaps, that, as we say in the paper, that philosophy helps us to think critically about organization and management as a problem. So it's not only that often we sometimes take for granted that there is organizations and managers and leaders out there, and we can study them sort of in a kind of neutral way, in an impartial manner. But also they can be sort of the current status quo, the way we do business, the way we think about it, that may also be questioned as a social problem. And I think excellent example of that is critical theory, where you draw on scholars like Adorno, Horkheimer, Habermas, for instance, where they're trying to use critical thinking by liberating people's sort of kind of taken for granted assumptions about oppressive forces like power and ideologies. You identify that and talk that, and you can sort of help people to get free. And that's another thing that is you also use philosophy to do that. So these are at least 4 different ways of working with philosophy, and I will say that number 2 and 3 are critical here, and of course wonder as well. Now, if you don't have any questions, I will go on and give you some examples. Yes, Eleanor, please. Sorry, I can't hear. I think you froze. No.
We can't hear you, Eleanor.
Maybe I will try to write down my questions. Oh, it works now.
Yes, the sound is not the best. Okay, yeah.
I have 2 questions regarding what you explained so far. The first one is, to what extent do you think that we can have a freedom in interpreting and then using philosophy? And this leads me to my second question, which is, but maybe I already anticipate to the challenge part of your talk, but to me, it's sometimes difficult to operationalize some philosophers' thoughts and to use them purposely in organization studies. For instance, I'm working on one of my projects on Levinas's thoughts, and it's really not, to me, an organizational scholar. So what do you deal with? How do you deal with these issues?
So can you just repeat the 2? The first question was, can you please repeat?
The first question was, to what extent do you think that we can have freedom in interpreting philosophies and selecting maybe some ideas, making things maybe less complex than they are in order to illuminate a project in organization studies?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, definitely. And I think there's probably different takes on that question. My own take is that as long you don't need, I'm not so concerned. I mean, you need to understand what they're trying to say, the philosophers, but you are drawing them on them, you get inspiration from them. But it means that when you translate it into your own work, you may then not follow them slavishly, but you're trying to use that as a kind of tool almost to make sense of your own work and leverage your own work. And if that's not completely accurate, and even philosophers, I think the even very best philosophers do that. Like Martin Heidegger did that very often. I think he draws sort of slightly, but then he pulled some out of that, and then he creates some very novel and original thought by combining some insight from different philosophers. And I think that you should be the more free and autonomous in that doing that. I think that's how you can break new ground, and feel free to do that. But of course, you can also acknowledge that to some extent. This is what the philosopher, but I'm not doing this. I'm taking this piece. I think that's one I would say. And the second question, I mean, you said you're working with Levinas, and you were wondering how can you bring in Levinas? Is that what you say in your own?
Yes, and Levinas and also other authors to me are not organization scholars, basically, for instance. And how can we? But I think it's linked to the reply you just gave. How can we operationalize some of their concepts?
Yeah, I may come to that bit later at the challenges, for instance, talk a bit more about that. But it's I almost think you have to engage. That's the best way. If you can engage deeply with the philosopher, you start to see all kind of possibilities through that person's philosophy, and you get more free, and you can see it everywhere. Like I can see with phenomenology, which is one of my favorite philosophy, and then I that's what I'm using in many different ways, and so I see if I can say so, applications as well in that. Yeah. A good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have one more question there? Yeah.
Fidelis?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Sandberg. I think the question that I would ask is really following a bit of Eleanor's questions, but then more specific to, for example, using philosophy to study organizations. The first question is, do we have a specific, let's say, philosophers that we can follow and use to study organizations? Because it seems like when you were answering Eleanor, you said if you use a good philosophy, then we are left, so something like we are left with what is a good philosophy then to follow and to, it's not, I know you, maybe I'm asking this question in the form of you giving us a prescription, but that's not the point, but at least we can have a starting point to look at. And then the second question is also philosophy work is more abstract level, and then we are grappling with some of their work. So for example, within critical realism philosophy, which is more recent and based on critique of existing philosophy, that it emerged, but we are still grappling with the terms used in those fields. And so I wanted to know what your views is in these two questions.
Yeah, the first one, I think what you understood, the good philosopher. What is a good? And the second question, I'm not sure. Was that that is unclear about what things are, or?
Yeah, the second question is, for example, I mentioned critical realism philosophy, which is exactly what I'm using at the moment to study organizations. But then the abstract level of some concepts that is introduced by philosophers is making us to grapple with using them. And I'm not just speaking this just only because of me, but in the field, having been in the field for a long time now, many people are grappling with the concept and ideas introduced in it to apply in practice, and that is what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. Okay. That again, I think that's a very similar question to Eleanor's question, and I may defer that answer a bit, but I definitely recognize it, and one of the biggest mistake people sometimes do is that they get too much engaged in philosophy, you never get out. They never return because it's so fascinating, and you get sort of sucked into this, and you start, but then you can't. So what do I do with all this now? Because I'm not a philosopher, and I'm not contributing to philosophy. I'm actually trying to do something in management organization studies. So how the heck do I bring myself back and using some of these insights? And I may through the next step of my talk and also later on, we come back. But that's a very, very good questions, and you sort of spot on, both of you, of the challenge, because it's something that I have encountered and still encounter, and I see many people do that. And it's a matter of finding a good balance. If you find the right balance, you're able to do the right thing. But if you go unbalanced way, you get stuck often. So these are big questions we grapple with. So thank you for those questions. So I'm not trying to make a move forward to exemplify some of these things, and you may have see, and then through that example, this example, you may see how you perhaps can utilize it. So I will provide 2 examples here. Oh my gosh, this is only 10 minutes left, Ibrat.
It's fine, Jorgen. Just keep going.
Yeah, because I think the examples, I may just need to take one then to that. But I will try to illustrate how philosophy can inform organization studies, and one is the case of competence. How you can use the, and here is sort of actually coming back into my PhD thesis many years ago, but that was my question, sort of the enigma of competence, and why do some people perform better than others, and then you can thinking about how does it come that that manager, engineer, teacher, some of these perform a job better than others, and there may be different things that depends on, but the critical thing is competence, because if you don't have competence, you can't perform anything. So it seems to be a key thing. What is what makes up this competence that makes these people perform so well? And this is a very important question in my view, and not only my view, it's actually the father of scientific management, Frederick Winslow Taylor. He famously said, sort of, or something along the lines, that if we had an answer to this question, what is competence, we would know what to focus on and what to improve, and how to improve the performance of individual groups and organizations. So if you think about organizational performance, work performance, then competence forms a cornerstone in that, and that sort of cornerstone in HRM, etc. And if you can understand that better, then we can make progress, not only theoretically but also practically. But this is not an easy question, and so how can we then investigate what makes up competence in work performance? How do you do that? For instance, in competence in management. If you're interested in management, what makes some managers perform better than others? Where would you start then to study the competence in management? Well, you have to have some idea what competence is. You have to have some initial idea what is competence as such. Otherwise, you can't. Otherwise, if you don't have that, you don't know what. I mean, how to study it, because you would have no idea what to look for when you go out studying. If you don't know what competence is, you can't study it. You can't theorizing it. You have to have some idea what it is. Otherwise, you can't go out and studying it. So you have to have something, and that it's not only competence; it's everything you study. You have to have some concepts or general understanding, initial understanding what's about. So what is then a common definition of competence is what you call the KSO, knowledge, skills, abilities, and other personal characteristics. Yeah, well, then now you have a good definition, don't you? There, but that's the idea here is that the assumption, sort of, that the people perform a specific job better than others is because they have a unique list of knowledge and skills that's superior to other people. So your task as a researcher, of course, then will be go out and study the knowledge of skills of managers, and then identify those knowledge and skills that the best manager have. That would be straightforward, wouldn't it? But it's not, because maybe we need to know more what do we mean by knowledge? What do we mean by skills? And that's not that easy. If you think about knowledge and skills, knowledge, often theoretical knowledge, testing knowledge, and then it becomes even worse. Also, what do we mean by testing knowledge then? And what do we mean by theoretical knowledge? So it becomes very tricky. And then you can even ask another question. Do these concepts of knowledge and skills actually provide a good conceptualization of competence? That is, I mean, if you study knowledge and skills of management, will we then be able to generate an accurate account of what makes up competence in management if you use those concepts? And I think you can refer that to your own studies as well. If you study your phenomenon X with these concepts, will you then be able to provide an accurate account of that phenomenon? Maybe not. And so this is where I'm referring back to my actually very PhD studies about my base question was that what constitutes competence in performance. I want to understand what actually is competence. Before we can do that, we can then study all other kind of occupations. And I looked at it at engineers at Volvo, how we can understand competence there as an empirical context. And it was there sort of I started to, when I was interviewing them, because I started out with the kind of knowledge and skills, and so I asked them what is the knowledge and skills in this engine, and the optimized engine as to develop new car engines. What kind of knowledge and skills are involved there? And when I started to interview them, they were talking about other things that seemed to be more important than that, but I couldn't put the finger. There was something about the meaning of work, how they understood work seems to be more important than the actual knowledge and skills. And I was sort of grappling and quite frustrated by this, because you can see this is the picture that I was working with, the kind of the received image of thought, that competence is as a kind of two separate entities, a set of attributes such as knowledge and skills possessed by the worker in a separate set of. So there's an idea that the worker is separate from the work. And if you identify this set of knowledge and skills, then you'll be able to find that. But the interview seemed to be saying something else. But what I was doing, I couldn't get it with this image of thought. I was stuck in this. This was my fly bottle, sort of. And then I started to enter into more kind of philosophical mode and see, can we understand other ways in which how people are related to the world? And that's when I encountered phenomenology and saying that you can't actually separate people from world, because they're related in sort of internally related through the lived experience of that. So if you separate them, that you destroy the understanding of work, which forms the basis for competence. And I'll try to develop that a bit. So this image of thought, this case A theory, is a dualist ontology. There's a sort of split up of subject into two distinct entities. And then you think that the competence is kind of an entity with certain properties, and then you then link it to another entity, and you see other. But that's not how it seems to be working, because they were talking about something else, the practitioners. So they talked about some understanding. And so with help of terminology, to cut a very long story short, it seems to be that understanding of work, how they understand work, forms the basis for competence. And that is how knowledge appears to them, forms the basis of competence. And just to give you another, so yeah, what is understanding that? Well, it's not yet another attribute, but that's what makes possible to develop and use attributes. We said work is not independent from us, but determined by understanding. So we don't carry out the work as such, only the understood work, the meaning of that work. So So what I'm saying here, the understanding of work provides the meaning of work. That is what it's about. And so we can only accomplish the work we think it is. So if you yourself what is teaching? We all teach. What is teaching competence? Well, teaching is about delivering a sort of, if you take a teaching-oriented view, that the teacher is supposed to deliver a clear communication to the students who seems more or less a blank sheet. And clear communication is important. But if you think about the opposite way, then it's more student-oriented, and the students have an understanding of the topic already. Then we have to do something very differently. Well, the same is with leadership. What is leadership about? Is it about giving commands? Then you develop knowledge and skills by giving commands. But if you think leadership is much more facilitating, then you do something quite different. And so my point here is that the understanding of work forms the basis for what knowledge and skills you develop and into a particular competence. And this is what I was seeing in my findings here. So I'm not sure I can go through, but there's 3 different forms of competence. So one understanding here. So talking about optimizing separate qualities. I mean, when you develop a new car engine, you have qualities of the engine, and then there's some parameters you mix. So in quality of the engine can be fuel consumption, another can be horsepower, another one can be emissions, and so on. And number 1 is quite narrow. So they focus on, this is competence. You're optimizing one fuel consumption, then you go to the next horsepower, and then you go next, and so on to it's fixed. And the other, number 2, interact, say, well, you do that, but even more important, it's these qualities are not separate, but they're interacting. So if you optimize the fuel consumption, you may affect the horsepower capacity and so on. So you have to have that in your mind. While the third one said, well, that's all important, but this actually, in the end, is how the customer experienced the car. And if you don't take that into account, then that will not be a good car. So you had a kind of different understandings that forms the basis for 3 different forms of competence. And I can't get into this, but the number 3 was seen by all of these people as the most effective engineer, and the most effective. And you can then ask the enigma of competence. Why do some perform better than others? It's not because they possess a unique set of knowledge and skills, but because of the specific understanding of work. So it's understanding, not attributes, knowledge and skills that define competence in work performance. So because understanding of work then defines what attributes we develop and how we use them. And there's the variation in understanding of work that decides the difference in why some people perform better than others at work. I needed 3 hours to describe this, but hopefully you got some sense of that. And then you can, of course, ask, did my now study lead to better understanding of work performance and hence give a more original and impactful research? Well, it's one sense not me to decide this, but still I have some evidence that I can offer. Some evidence is that my study was published in AMJ in 2000. That's from my PhD as a lead article in the new millennium. And I sort of so far got over 2,000 citations. It's still getting there. So it was seen as a new perspective on competence. And also, interestingly, just after it was published, I was contacted by Harvard Business Review saying that, could you write the piece for us? Because what your study shows is it challenged received wisdom. I said, is that what you want to? So yeah, that's what we're after. We want to have pieces that actually challenge received wisdom. So people start to think differently about that. So I think that gives you some kind of idea. So these are the two texts from that. I have written many more texts from that, but that gives you some idea what it can be do here. I don't know, Ibrat, I have one more example, but there are so many questions. I have a few more things I would like to say. So maybe we should skip that example and go to to something else.
Whatever you're comfortable with, Jorgen. I think it sounds very interesting. So if you want to continue with it.
Okay, I can continue, give it slot because it's quite heavy, so but you get the sense of it. So let's take a much more recent, and I guess most of you are familiar with the sense-making perspective. Carl Weick. So this is, as you may know, the sense-making is one of the most influential perspectives in organizational studies, and is seen as forming the basis for organizational actions and activities. And it was developed by Carl Weick over 50 years ago now. And so it's, I think someone said, it's second after institutional theory in terms of impact, in terms of how people use it. So it's a huge thing. And many people are working with that and find it very valuable. But according to the dominant view, sense-making is episodic. It's sense-making only occurs when something goes wrong in our activities. So I'm teaching and everything's fine, but then the projector is or we not use projector, or maybe we still use projector, but it breaks down or is something. And what's going on here now? So what do I do now? I have to make sense of the situation to restart the situation. Aha, it was just something glitch in some cable. Now I can work it again. So that's so sense-making according to the dominant view only takes place when something is wrong or interrupted. When things go smoothly, you perform well, no sense-making. You just do your job. But people start to question that. And they've done that for quite some time. And people start to say that maybe sense-making is more than just one type. It's more than episodic. There seems to be other types going on, and particularly something called immanent sense-making. There's some sense-making going on, but it's no interruptions. Thinking about tennis player, when they play Nadal or Djokovic, when they play full extraordinary matches, and don't they make sense? Are they senseless? No, it's full of sense-making there. But the common sense-making perspective can't take care of that, because it only allows you to see sense-making as interrupted. And why is that the case? And that's where we Harry and I then talked about that. It has to do with that it's missing out of ontology. There is a too narrow ontology that underlies existing sense-making. It doesn't allow them to study this, because this existing ontology, which I'll talk about, is kind of split between subject and verb, similar to the engine optimizer. So here is there's something wrong, and now I have to make sense what's going on in my engine. It doesn't work. But what I'm saying is that there's a major shortcoming here, because there's only one way. This is only one way to make sense. There is what is sort of left out is a more basic way of making sense in the world. And if you think, when you drive the car, the sense and action is merged. When you drive the car to work, or whatever you drive to shopping, you still make sense and you act at the same time. So sense and actions are two sides of the same coin. That immanent sense making. So this is something that is more basic than the kind of episodic sense making. So in order to capture this immanent sense making, we can't do that with that split. We have to have another kind of ontology. So we then suggest we go from a more dualist ontology to what we call an existential ontology, drawing on Heidegger and Dreyfus and other. So here, this ontology shows that subject-object relation presupposes it's actually derivative from our being in the world, that we are always immersed first, that we engage. That's our most basic way of being. We are immersed in what we are doing. It's only when things go wrong then that's where we start to move away. We move from being involved to being disengaged, but that presupposes being involvement. So this is a more basic way of being in the world, rather than the subject object, because it's on the basis that you do this that comes up. So interrupted is the test deliberate. So if you expand the ontology here from just the subject object, you can then develop a new basis for sense making, how that works. So you come from abroad, so you can go back from, as I said, about episode that's ongoing. Sense making goes on all the time, but in different forms. So we develop a typology. We talk about immanent sense making, involved deliberate sense making, the test deliberate, and representative sense making. And to give you a flavor of that, you have the immanent sense making when you drive. But then involved deliberate is something you're still driving, but there's something going on. Ding, ding, there is digging up something that is the oil is flashing, is something wrong, but you still have to drive. But then the next step you can detach deliberate. But you go up and down all the time. And sometimes I think if you teach, think about that. You teach, everything goes fine, and there's some trouble, some students asking questions, or there's some projector, but you still have to continue. But then sometimes it breaks down, and you have to step back from the activity and do that. But then you go up and down. And then if there's something wicked, then you sometimes you move into some inquiry report. Then you go to another type of sense making again. I can't go into all these details here, but episode is sort of going on there. So this then shift in ontology enabled us to then reshape our understanding of sense making, how it takes place, and that helps to renew the agenda of sense making research, and also makes possible to study sense making in a much more nuanced way. And that's thanks through by replacing the dual ontology to more extensional ontology, we were able to develop new concepts, new distinctions based on that new ontology. So again, did our study lead to new better understanding? Well, we think it is, and there are even some evidence for that. One is that it was awarded the James March Prize for the best article in Oak's theory. But I think the best prize was it got a very nice letter from the man himself, Carl Weick, saying that I have studied your new Oak theory paper, and ever since I first saw it, it's a moral piece of work, and now more I understand. Yeah, I continue to learn a lot from that with affection, Carl Weick, and that was sort of indicating that there was something of interest for him, and we did something well there. But it remains to be seen is people taking up this more and more, and it was quite recently published, but it's doing well in terms of citations as well. Some other examples, there are heaps of examples, are not my own examples, but you can go to other many studies we talk about in the paper, but here's some other that I did using Husserl, Heidegger, and Derrida, talking about what is knowledge, how we justify knowledge in interpretive approaches. Is still something people are working on, and the one Harry and I wrote about grasping the logical practice, where we use Heidegger and Dreyfus, is going very well. And Harry's and Robert Chia's paper on organizational becoming, where they introduce process philosophy, Bergson and William James, is still going, ticking. People are drawing on that because it's almost a new school. 2 papers from the special issue that I don't know how well it will go, but I think they're both 2 interesting papers. One when Robin Holt and Renee Widener draw on Hannah Arendt and talking about the sensus communis and challenge and sense-making perspective, again, in even a more fundamental way than what we did, and that may be something coming. And Morten Tenning and company use Hegel's conception of freedom to challenge the very common view of freedom as kind of autonomy, etc. That put them again on its head. So there are many you can have a look at, because I think by looking at this example, you can get at this, how can you do it yourself there in this balanced way. So what drawing on some philosophy to generate some more impactful research, some key principles? Well, of course, what are the relevant philosophy assumptions underlying your topic of studies? Agency, action, time, reality, that really matters to your topic or phenomenon. Problematize. What alternative philosophy assumption can you draw upon to problematize key features there? And then that's why what the kind of philosophy you know, and or you may consult various texts and see what kind of philosophy have addressed these issues. If it's particularly concept like agency or freedom, where can you study that? And then you can perhaps apply new philosophical insights, distinctions to the, if you draw on some philosophy to create new image of thought. And then based on that, you need to develop then new concepts based on the new image of thought that you draw on there. And you see, this is what we did, and this is what I did in my competence paper. I was drawing on phenomenology, and Harry and I, we draw on Heidegger, for instance, and then we problematized that and got a new image resource, and we developed new concepts. But as we said before, there are challenges, and they're quite significant challenges, I must admit, to do all this stuff. So, I mean, and particularly in beginnings, if you're not used to this, it can be quite time consuming, because as you indicated there, it takes time to understand a philosophy and the philosophical ideas. So I guess some mistake you sometimes make is you go directly to the philosopher, but that's often not a good idea. It's often better to go to commentaries that have actually experts understand Heidegger, Derrida, or Deleuze. What's the main thinking? To me, I usually use commentary, and then I gradually go into the philosophy herself. Another one I see too often, a danger of getting caught in philosophical jargon. And this is the thing that you can't get out of that. You get so entangled in the philosophical, technical jargon that you can't get out of that. And so then you bring that in your own studies. And then the editors and reviewers and readers that get really angry and say, what the heck are you talking about? I don't understand you. But this is so good. Yeah, but maybe 5 other people understand, but you're not talking to philosophers, you're talking to organization scholars here, and you need to do something else. So that's I have seen, unfortunately, quite too often. I know people who are much more well-versed in philosophy than I am, but they never publish in any significant journal because they can't get out of that. Yeah. So so there's, coming back to actually both of your questions, there's sort of several tricky steps involved in drawing a philosophy. So one is, of course, that you need to understand the philosopher's key idea, if that's about agency or identity or whatever. So that's the easy part in one sense. But then you need to translate that philosopher's ideas and express it in a more accessible language. So not only you, but also your colleagues can understand and get some insights from that. So you have to remove that technical thing, and that's in one sense you start to do violence against some of these languages, but there's a core idea that you can still express in a much easier way, I think. But then number three, then you need to apply this idea into your phenomenon. So now you have make it clear, people understand, but now you have to apply it. And so how can you then use this idea to either to unpack received image of thoughts and use it as a new image of thought? So but then the fourth one is then you have laid the ground now. You have a new image of thought, like Harry and I had about the existential ontology of sense making, but that's not enough. So what do we do now? Now we have to develop new concepts and distinctions that enable us to then identify 4 different types of sense making that then could be a better way of understanding sense making. So we have to have all these 4 things: understand the authors first, or the ideas, translate it into more ordinary language, and 3, apply it in a productive way, and then 4th, develop these concepts. So you can ask if it's worth it, and I think it is time consuming, and you may produce less research, but often the papers are more impactful, and they last considerably longer because you have made new grounds. And you can see this paper I referred to that 20 years ago, and they're still ticking along 1,500 citations every year. And so that's a difference here, and you make an impact in the sense that you influence other people's way of thinking and doing research. Instead of COVID, yeah, some spiked that, but then now they drop because COVID is gone. So this is that you break a more new ground there. So my encouragement is to start drawing philosophy and break out a fly bottle and generate more impactful research. So thank you for that. And here's some resources that many resources. I'm pointing to some. If you are intrigued, please look into to attend to the Philos conference next year in Athens. There are other resources, the handbooks of philosophy and organizational studies, for instance, and so on. That you can have a look at that. But now I have spoken too much, and I'm sure there may be some questions if people are still there. But thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yes, can I quickly ask a question again? Sorry.
Yeah.
Professor Young, I was just wondering, in applying philosophy to empirical work like you have done from your work, I wonder how this is in terms of companies hanging on with the time, because philosophy takes a long time to get, for example, to the structures or mechanism one is interested in drawing. And companies do not have that patience, because that's what I'm experiencing at the moment. So what do you do?
Are you doing research for companies?
Yes, I'm applying the philosophy on companies, organizations that I'm studying here in the UK.
Yeah, but what's the purpose of your research? Is that is that academic research? Do you want to make a contribution to science or the academic work? Or
Yes.
Well, then then you're not in a particular hurry, are you?
Sorry.
But if your purpose is to develop knowledge that is academic knowledge, theoretical knowledge,
Yeah.
Then you're not in a particular hurry necessarily.
Yeah, is to make a contribution, but I think in the end, I want to make a contribution towards the development of philosophy of science. But first, the PhD level, because you are limited with time to get things finished. So, which is what I'm currently confronting now, because I have to make academic contribution first, and then move on.
Yeah, and of course, the absolute best is if you can identify some phenomenon, that you make a contribution, not only to to the academic world, but also to the practice. And I mean, the idea of competence, as I mentioned before, a lot of practitioners found this very interesting too, because they could see if I use this view or theory of competence that proposed, they can actually improve the HR activities, etc. So I think, and that's also what the Harvard Business Review were indicating, that you challenge received wisdom. Can we do business better? Can we do something better? And it's good to think through that when you develop or start a research project. Where would this lead to? Will it make a difference, not only theoretically, but also practically? Because a challenging assumption is often also challenging common sense, that we think this is how it is, but philosophy helps us to break that too. See, there are other people want to say, can you, who? Yes, please.
Julia?
I'm online.
You are?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you
Yes.
so much. Probably I a little bit missed the question, clarification question. I noticed at one slide you mentioned existentialist ontology, and I was very curious how you came up with exactly this philosophical stream, not another one. What was the roots of this turn?
Well, again, I guess is a good question. I think it probably
Maybe I should explain myself, because I just came up with very similar solution last year with a similar existentialist turn. And I'm wondering, like, I know my story, how I came up with it in about 3 years. And I'm curious how it happened for other people, because it's a bit unexpected.
In our case, I don't think it's that difficult. So Harry Tsoukas and myself, we both followed or been sort of following the Heidegger's philosophy quite deeply, and Hubert Dreyfus, who is an interpreter of Heidegger's philosophy, and so we brought a paper 2011 the practical rationality, where we were drawing heavily on Heidegger. And the thing was, we had to overcome this subject-object distinction, which is the very dualistic ontology. And this is exactly what Heidegger's philosophy of ontology helps us to do. He says that he even critique his father or his master, Edmund Husserl, because Husserl had some distinctions there, but Heidegger said, well, there's something deeper going on here. That's the being in the world that forms the basis and on which we can create the subject-object distinctions. It's only when something going on. So it to us, it was a very suitable kind of ontology that worked well for the purpose we wanted to do, to develop sense-making, broaden the ontological base for sense-making. But there may be other possibilities, potentially pragmatism, but we didn't know that well. And I think it has drawbacks too. But yeah, that's our story.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. So it also has just roots in some, like, let's say, founding fathers. I've seen the work by Kai Riemer on also Heidegger for objects. Again, like exiting the dualism, and I have seen very interesting work which skips Heidegger and return to Husserl, but I guess it's not rolled out yet. Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I know Kai very well, so we're communicating on a regular basis, and Kai is a strong Heideggerian, and there are quite a few people, and the whole practice theory. If you think about practice theory, I don't know how many of you knows about practice theory, but Ted Chatsky, etc., who developed, and also Giddens, Bourdieu to a large extent, draw in various ways on Heidegger's philosophy, to some extent only. They're all big thinkers, and they pinch certain ideas and then they make up things.
Well, maybe to just complete this point, for me it was a very big surprise when I started my doctoral studies in management, because I'm a sociologist, and for me it was a big surprise that I'm actually not obliged to clarify my philosophical foundations that I choose.
Well, I guess depends on where. If it's your PhD, you may have more space to do that. In a article, often you don't have space to do that. You have to somehow indicate it anyway, but you don't have time to elaborate that. But often you can do that with drawing on Heidegger's being and time and his ideas of the tool ontology, whatever you want to say, and that is enough for some readers to understand what the roots of your the kind of source of your philosophical influence or inspiration.
Kari, do you have a question?
Yeah, I would have. So my name is Kari Lukko. I come from the University of Turku. Thank you very much for your great presentation, Jorgen. I come back to one of the things that you said towards the end of your speech, which was about not going too into the philosophy or philosopher or social thinker, which you might be using. And so what I've learned, and which I'm using in my own teaching, and I even have a paper on this thing, is that, and this relates to your other works on problematization with Mats Alvesson. So I think one confusion when you start using a social thought or social thinker is that you are confused where your problematization lies. And I think a very good hint, like at the general level, is that you should be seeing your philosopher or philosophical thought stream as only something that you use, but normally you don't problematize that. But then you have to problematize something, and that is your domain, which might be management studies, org studies, or in my case, it is management accounting research. And I think this distinction is really important to understand. This is I'm only using, and this is where I do research based on using this framework or philosophy or thought stream. And with the help of that, I can ask new type of questions. How does this sound to you?
No, I think if I understood you correctly there, I mean, that's what I was trying to say early on.
Yeah.
That not contributing to philosophy. So philosophy is a means, a tool or a resource that can inform us to study something in our field.
Yeah.
And as long as you make that distinction, I think then then it works. But if you somehow think that you want to contribute to philosophy and do something, then it doesn't work.
Yeah. So in that paper, which is published in Accounting Auditing Accountability Journal in 2014, we made a distinction between method theory and domain theory. And in the domain theory, you are trying to problemize something and contribute something to. This is the normal situation. And normally not on your method theory, which might be practice theory or whatever. But I see you agree.
Yeah, no. But that's a good distinction. I mean, it's important distinction to make, otherwise easy to get lost.
Yeah, thanks.